Hi, I'm Tom Harrison, and these are Perceptions from Asbury United Methodist Church. Monday is Memorial Day. It may surprise you to know that the day that honors military personnel who died while serving in our armed forces was not a federal holiday until 1971, while we were still in the Vietnam War. This American flag was given to my mom at my father's funeral for his service in the Army during the Korean War. Like so many of you who have also received a flag at such an occasion, I'm personally grateful for the sacrifice and service of our military. Tonight, Asbury will spend a few minutes expressing our gratitude for these who have served. We will also share a few ways we can follow their example of sacrifice and service. Veterans often use humor as a way to cope with some of the travails and trivialities of life in the military. Here are a few clever examples of military humor, observation, and wisdom. Never tell the sergeant you have nothing to do. If your attack is going too well, you're walking into an ambush. When the pin is pulled, Mr. Grenade is not our friend. 5-second fuses last about 3 seconds. Any ship can be a minesweeper once. The only time you have too much fuel is when you're on fire. Aim towards the enemy. This instruction is printed on a rocket launcher. If the enemy is in range, so are you. Try to look unimportant. They may be low on ammo. If you see a bomb technician running, follow him. Flying the airplane is more important than making your plight to someone on the ground incapable of understanding or doing anything about it. Friendly fire isn't. Whoever said the pen is mightier than the sword never encountered automatic weapons. Here's a shocking one. Nothing is so good for the morale of the troops as to occasionally see a dead general. Weather forecasts are horoscopes with numbers. A good battle plan you act on today is better than the perfect one you plan for tomorrow. This final one is attributed to General Douglas MacArthur. We're not retreating, we're advancing in another direction. Even in the military, life is a lot about perception.
Named Michael Page, and I was United States Army, retired. Well, I served everywhere. I was in the medical corps, and so I was shipped around the country quite a bit. I served in Kansas, Nebraska, Washington State, here in Oklahoma, Kentucky, and then overseas in Germany, Spain, England. So I've seen the world. I was a pediatric surgeon. The soldiers have families, and so we would treat the children, and then in time of war, we were ready to treat civilian casualties as well. Going back to the War of 1812, some male in my family has served in the military in some form or another. And so I just came by it naturally. It's kind of a legacy in my family. It's important to celebrate Memorial Day because you're really celebrating your legacy. Every family has a legacy, you know, whether they understand it or know it or not. There is somebody that went in their family that served. And so we honor that service, we honor that legacy.
A World War II vet, Joe Stahl, lived to be 90. He was only 20 years old in October 1944 when he landed with his National Guard unit near Marseille, France. 6 months later, Joe was engaged in a fierce firefight. It lasted from midnight until dawn. His unit ran out of ammunition and they were captured. Nazis lined up Joe and his buddies before a machine gun to be executed. Something incredible happened. A German commander refused to allow the slaughter. He ordered that the guns be put away. The prisoners were spared. However, their hardship was not over. They were forced to take a brutal march over rugged terrain to an Austrian POW camp. 2 weeks later, his captors suddenly disappeared because the war in Europe had ended. Had that officer not intervened, Joe would never have been married to his wife for 61 years, been a father of 5, a grandfather of 15, and a great-grandfather of 6. He would never have had a career at Amoco or been a member at Asbury. Joe Stahl's encounter reminds us, an enemy might turn out to be a friend. An American pilot was shot down and captured during the Gulf War in 1991. Some captured pilots were beaten and humiliated in every possible way. But the opposition made a big mistake when they put our pilots on their national television. Their tactics infuriated Americans. One pilot had been badly beaten. His face was swollen from the crash. Fearing for his life, he mumbled their propaganda into the camera. But then they let him speak to his family back home, and he only said 10 words. "Honey, I love you. Tell the kids to study hard." In 4 words, he assured his wife that nothing could separate his love for her, and she was still his #1 priority. In 6 words, he told his kids they still had a father who wanted them to do their best. It's a good question to ask. What would you say if you only had 10 words to say to those you loved? There's tremendous power in simple words. Honey, I love you. Tell the kids to study hard. Jay Henderson is a pastor who recently served at Asbury. Before becoming a chaplain, he flew helicopters in Iraq. Jay's now deployed with the U.S. Army in South Korea. I'd like for you to hear from Jay.
Hi, I'm Chaplain Jay Henderson, chaplain for the 299 Brigade Support Battalion, 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team of the 1st Infantry Division, and I'm on a rotation here at Camp Humphreys, South Korea, where our unit is working with and training alongside our Republic of Korea allies. Well, I initially enlisted at age 17 in April of 2001. Originally, it was, I think, my adventurous spirit. I'm an Eagle Scout and always had a sense of adventure, and this looked like a great opportunity where my civic responsibility and that desire for adventure combined. And so I enlisted, but of course, that was before September 11th. And after that, everything changed a little bit. Well, what was before an opportunity to maybe go to college and serve in a meaningful way became much more of a mission. I've had family members also deployed overseas, and one in particular, my cousin, he was an Apache helicopter pilot, and we were very close. And in the process of saving an ambushed fuel convoy in Iraq in 2004, was actually shot down and killed. He was shot down with an SA-16 rocket. And so for me, serving became far more important in a deeper, more profound way. As a chaplain, I've had the opportunity to really help people in a significant way. We've been battling a lot of challenges that I think everybody's struggling with around the world with the current COVID lockdown. But it's been particularly pronounced here, being isolated from our families. We're on a 9-month rotation, and our families aren't here with us. And so being isolated and confined and adapting to the changes, it can lead to feelings of loneliness and isolation. Plus, the struggles at home don't go away. Families going through difficult things, loss of loved ones, or maybe close friends that the nature of the relationship doesn't warrant getting emergency leave to go home and attend a funeral. Or maybe there's relationship struggles and figuring out how to communicate from across a vast distance. And so I've been able to be there for my soldiers and to be a safe place for them to sort these things out and to help find resources that can help them out or point them in the right direction. So from a chaplain's perspective, I think Memorial Day is very important to celebrate because it reminds us of those individuals like my cousin, Shane Colton, and others who have given the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our nation and the principles of freedom and liberty that we stand for. As a chaplain, I'm required to have 3 core competencies, and that's nurture the living, care for the wounded, and honor the dead. And that third principle is one that we are doing when we embrace Memorial Day. It's important to remember that Memorial Day, it's not Veterans Day. It's not a time where we're remembering all veterans who have served, that we're thankful for that service, but it is a set apart holiday to remember and memorialize those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. But sometimes the best way to honor the service of our sons and daughters who are serving in the military is to invest in them. Write them a personal letter. Invest in a ministry or a nonprofit that engages them in a personal way, not just a lot of fanfare and pomp and circumstance, but really does help them because they're sacrificing a lot. And so we really want to be there for them in a real way, not just a way that makes us feel good, but doesn't require any commitment on our part. So I'd like to give a shout out to my family, my beautiful wife, Jamie, and I have 4 kids, Jade, Jacob, and Jenica and Juliana. And they are back home holding everything down while I'm away. And I love them dearly and I miss them so much. But they're tough and we can make it through this. We've done it before and I look forward to getting home soon.
The USS Pueblo was sent on an intelligence mission off the coast of North Korea in 1968. On January 23rd, North Korean naval vessels and MiG jets attacked. 1 sailor was killed, several others were wounded. 82 were captured and held prisoners for 11 months. They were treated viciously. At times, they had to sit rigidly in a room. One day, a guard burst into the room and bludgeoned a sailor to unconsciousness with the butt of his gun. This happened 3 days in a row. On the 4th day, the men realized that sailor could not survive another beating, so a different man switched seats with him. When the guard entered and began to assault the sailor, it was a new man taking the beating. The next day, another sailor took the seat in that awful chair. Each man knew what it meant to take the seat, but they also knew that their sacrifice saved a comrade's life. Their action finally wore down the hatred of the guards who gave up in exasperation. As the proverb says, there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Or, as another verse says, let us not love in word and talk, but in deed and in truth. A soldier, Ralph, picked up a man at the airport to drive him to Ralph's military base. As they headed to the baggage claim, Ralph helped an elderly lady whose suitcase had fallen open, and then he lifted 2 toddlers so they could see Santa. Then he gave directions to someone who was lost. Each time Ralph helped someone, he smiled. The man he was driving for became curious. Where'd you learn to do that? Ralph asked. Do what? Where'd you learn to help people like that? Ralph said, my job during my tour in Vietnam was to clear minefields. I saw a lot of my buddies blown up right before my eyes. When I cleared a field, I never knew if the next step would be my last. So I learned to get everything I could out of the moment between when I picked up my foot and when I put it down again. Every step I took was a whole new world. I guess I've just been that way ever since. Today matters, tomorrow's uncertain. We're not guaranteed even the next step. Let's choose to live now and live well. Let's choose to help others. We're grateful to those who have chosen to serve our country in times of war and peace. And now we salute all the branches of the armed forces.
The United States Army.
Over hill, over dale, we have hit the dusty trail, and those caissons go rolling along. Counter march right about, hear those wagon soldiers shout, while those caissons go rolling along. For it's high, high, he in the field artillery, call up your numbers on and strong, and wherever you go, you will always know that those caissons are rolling along. We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in Thee. Through surf and storm and howling gale, I shall on purpose keep.
The United States Coast Guard.
Apparatus is our guide, our very glory to fight, to save, oh, fight and die. I Coast Guard, we're all for you.
The United States Marines.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First we fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marine.
The United States Air Force.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high to the sun. Here they come, swimming to meet our thunder. Overlords, give her the gun. Down we dive, starting our flame from under. Off with one terrible roar. We live in flame, we'll go down in flame. Nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force.
The United States Navy.
Anchors aweigh, my boys, anchors aweigh. Farewell to college joys, we sail at break of day, 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 day. Through our last night on shore, hail to the foe. Until we meet once more, here's wishing you a happy voyage home.
Winston Churchill kept the British focus during the darkest days of World War II. He told about speaking to a man who volunteered to serve in the British Navy. Nazi submarines were sinking huge numbers of ships at that time. The survivors could last only a few minutes in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. Many rescue ships were also sunk. When Churchill asked why he had volunteered for such a dangerous assignment, the man said, "I know I could die, but I've heard the cries of the men in that water. They will die if we pass them by because we don't have enough room in our boat. That's why I enlisted. I must return time and again. And even if I die, I must help save as many as I can." Listen to his final remark to Churchill. "But what bothers me is when I come home and go to the store and hear people griping because there's a shortage of tea or bread or this or that. Their complaints are in stark contrast with the cries of the men drowning in the freezing waters of the North Sea." Mature people see beyond themselves and try to reach out to help others in need. Clara Barton wanted to help others in need. She founded the American Red Cross in 1881. They provide services to members of the American Armed Forces and their families, as well as offering disaster relief in the United States and around the world. The Red Cross has held blood drives in Asbury for years. Our next one will be on June the 6th from 10 to noon. Giving blood is giving the gift of life. Please consider making a donation. Americans and Germans deeply resented each other following World War II. We blamed them for starting both world wars. At the time, most Americans saw Germans as barbarians who deserved the destruction that fell upon them. Many Germans blamed us for bombing their nation to utter ruin. But when the Soviets blockaded Berlin, we led the West in an airlift that brought millions of pounds of supplies each day to that city. However, we had little emotional connection with the people of Berlin. The Candy Bombers is a great book that tells of the bond of friendship that was formed between the previous foes. A U.S. Air Force pilot started dropping candy from his cockpit to the children as he approached the Berlin runway. What started as a random act of kindness created affection between the former enemies. Germans realized Americans cared about kids. Americans realized Germans weren't monsters. Each began to change their negative stereotypes and started seeing the others as human beings. What works for nations also works for individuals. Kindness and generosity can open the doors for a new day. Asbury members recently collected $10 gift cards for employees at one of our local hospitals as a way of saying thank you for their service. You might consider doing something kind and generous to show appreciation for first responders, such as firefighters, police, nurses, doctors, and EMTs, or perhaps others who have been serving the community during this pandemic. Moses, the greatest figure in the Old Testament, led the Israelites for 40 years. Before he died, he made Joshua his successor. How would you like to be the guy who followed Moses? Joshua led his people into a new land and also into many battles. He needed confidence. I'll talk more about this dramatic shift in leadership in my message tomorrow. If you don't have a place to worship, please join us online at asburytulsa.org.
My name is Jim Brakey, and I served in the United States Air Force from 1969 to 1975, and I got out of the Air Force as a captain. I joined the military because of the Vietnam War was at its height at the time, and I had been drafted to join the Army. And actually, my parents were both pilots, and actually, my brother was a helicopter pilot in the Army, and my other brother, my youngest brother, was an aircraft mechanic in the Navy. So we've all been in aviation. All of us are pilots, and so it just seemed to be a natural fit. And I went through pilot training, and then through instructor pilot training, and then I served as an instructor pilot and flight test pilot at Craig Air Force Base in Selma, Alabama. Vietnam was on all of our minds because in my graduating class of 70, I would suspect at least 35 of them went directly into an airplane and directly into some sort of action in Vietnam. It was an interesting time, whether you were for the war or not. It's has I think a special impact on the Air Force because although I never served in combat, one of the most interesting experiences I heard from those who had served in combat was the degree of detachment from the war. When you're at 35,000 feet and your mission is to drop bombs, you don't see who those are hitting. And that affected them. I have quite a few friends and students that I can remember that did not make it. They went on to war or they were killed in accidents flying, and I always remember them.
I love this poem. Remember the day I borrowed your new car and I dented it? I thought you'd kill me, but you didn't. Remember the time I dragged you to the beach and you said it would rain, and it did? I thought you'd say, I told you so, but you didn't. Remember when I flirted with all the guys to make you jealous, and you were? I thought you'd leave me, but you didn't. Remember when I forgot to tell you the dance was formal and you showed up in jeans? I thought you'd drop me, but you didn't. Yes, there were lots of things you didn't do, but you put up with me and you loved me and you protected me. And there were lots of things I wanted to make up to you when you returned from Vietnam, but you didn't. This poem tells the truth. We don't live forever. It's easy to take people for granted. If we share our gratitude for another person while we have the opportunity, it might make a big difference to us and to them. I'm Tom Harrison, and these have been Perceptions from Asbury United Methodist Church. God bless you, and God bless America.